Hello all, and welcome back. Climbing the Puzzle Streak ladder. Today we'll be tackling the puzzles 20 to 25. We're starting with a rating of 1590 today, and I expect we'll be somewhere around the 1700 mark by the end of these five puzzles. So let's just hop into the first one here. For this one, I notice there is some trouble towards our king, but if either the rook give if either any of the rooks give check, um, we can just sidestep it. What's more concerning is queen to g4 check, as that reps the queen come down to g7 and deliver some very threatening checks to a king, maybe resulting in checkmate. So, what are our options here? Um, I see we're down a bishop currently. The pawns are equal, and I noticed that the rook is actually directly x-raying the queen. So this is something very useful that we can take as a rule of thumb. Whenever we have a piece lining up one of our opponent's pieces, we can start looking at discoveries. So this bishop is the only thing that's in the way of the rook taking queen. If I can get rid of the bishop with tempo, I'll be able to take queen on the next move. So directly just looking at our forcing moves, um, the most forcing move we can give is a check. So immediately my mind gets drawn to bishop takes b2 check, and I noticed that no matter what the king does, if he takes the bishop on b2 or runs away, there's no way he could prevent my rook from taking his queen to the next move. So I expect that's a solution. Queen g4 is a pressing issue anyway, so that has to be taken care of, and we can take care of it by eliminating their queen. So let's try that. He does take the bishop, after which we can take the queen, and the puzzle continues. Here I think it is best if we employ the elimination technique. So since we're in check, there's a limited number of moves we can play. We can block with a rook, which is obviously bad. Um, we can play king f8, but just looking at the checks that white has after that, he can actually play bishop to h6 check, after which our king is forced to e8, and then his rook can actually slide down and collect our queen. So that really leaves us with only one reasonable choice, and that's to play king h8. So let's do that, and it's a success. Still curious about what happens after bishop h6. Alright, we can just take the pawn and win the bishop. Okay, here, so this is one of those gifts, as I like to call it. It's just a simple mate in one. It's tempting to go for this check, but really we already have the king covering that, so we need the queen to cover these squares below the white, or rather above the white king. Um, Therefore, just looking at the options, um, we come to the conclusion that king h1, I mean queen h1 is actually checkmate. So there we go. Okay. Um, so there's a lot of firepower going down towards the black king. Our king is relatively safe. So now we just have to think about some kind of combination, some type of forcing combination that causes black as much trouble as possible. So the first thing is queen takes g7 just isn't checkmate because his queen can recapture back. Um, our queen's actually under attack right now, so we don't really have time to play pawn takes g7. Um, if queen wasn't under attack, we could maybe consider pawn takes g7 with the intention of maybe taking the h7 pawn with the bishop or the rook next. But here our queen's actually under attack, so there's something immediate we need to do. Um, moving the queen here is too slow, I think. It isn't really threatening anything since this queen is always defending g7. Um, just looking at all the forcing moves, the only other check is actually bishop takes h7, and this looks promising because if the king actually takes, um, we can take with this pawn now, and that comes with tempo since it's a discovered check. So black doesn't really have time to take our queen, and that in fact looks very promising because if the king goes back there, um, I believe rook to h8 check, and we can take his rook, which we can take his rook with our pawn, and it the results will be devastating for black. So leaning towards bishop takes h7. There's another thing that we have to calculate though. What if bishop takes h7 and king to f7? Hmm. Then I expect maybe queen to h5, and once king to e7 is played, I expect we could take here, and it honestly looks really devastating for black. Don't really see anything else. Um, let's go for that line again. Bishop takes h7 check. Um, king to f7, queen to h5 check, and king to e7. Good thing is, after we take that pawn, the queen isn't actually going to be defending it. Yes, that must be correct. So, could go for that. I don't really see any other first move here. So, bishop takes h7, and now we continue with our plan. He actually took with the king rather than go to f7. So, we take the pawn with check from the rook, and the puzzle ends there. Continue onwards, king g8, rook h8, king to f7, and yes, then we take the rook and promote at the same time. Takes back, we can maybe take with our rook again, or the computer suggests queen h5, but white's completely winning in either case here. Okay, so we're down a bishop here, but we do have this one pass pawn. Hmm, this rook actually is pressurizing this bishop, and the king is the only one that's defending it. Um, that's the first thing that sticks to my mind because we can try giving checks here, but then the king's just going to run back, and our rook isn't really attacking anything on the e file, so it's just kind of pointless to stay there. It's better we maintain pressure on this bishop and try and find a way maybe to get the king distracted so we can take it. Hmm. So how do we distract the king? We can really the only reasonable check is pawn to f5, and after g takes f5 and g takes f5, um, king takes f5, we can actually take the rook, and over there, we're actually up a pawn in the end, I believe. Not up a pawn, but it's equal material after that, and this pawn is way too strong, I think. Yes. Um, I really don't see anything else black can do. Um, this rook is going to be excellent blockader for the foreseeable future. So I don't really see a direct way to get this pawn moving, at least for the time being. So yes, I think f5 is good. Um, f5, the king can't step here, so the king has to essentially go to a square where it's not protecting the bishop anymore. F3, e3, d3. Um, so yes, I expect that must be the solution. And the really good thing about being up that bishop, or rather winning the bishop, is this rook is essentially useless. He can't really escape ever, and if he ever takes the bishop, we can actually take the pawn. So essentially, we're going to be up a rook after the exchanges are done. So yes, I think f5 is the answer. He takes, we take, and then take the bishop. It's surprisingly only minus 2.2. I would have thought it's a lot more. Um, just because this rook is completely misplaced. But okay, winning endgame either way. Continue. So there's a lot of stuff happening near the black king. Our king is relatively safe. Um, Immediately, if we try and look at forcing moves, there's queen to g6 check, but the king just runs away. Or rather, the queen could block even. So this is thematically similar to our previous puzzle, where we kind of had this ongoing pressure between two pieces, and the key really is to remove the defender. We notice that it's only because of this knight that queen isn't hanging. So the simple answer is to get rid of the knight with tempo, just how f5 was with tempo in the previous puzzle. So yes, the answer must be bishop takes f7, and after rook takes, we can take queen for 5. So we've reached 1643 and we've reached 25. Um, I expect the puzzles to become a lot harder after the 40 mark. So yes, make sure you stick around for that, and I will see you in the next part.